I used to believe that if two people built a life together, they would always protect what they had created. I believed that trust was something solid, almost impossible to break. Looking back now, I realize how easy it is to mistake routine for security. The signs had been there all along, but I had convinced myself that every strange moment had a reasonable explanation. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how I discovered that my husband had secretly put our house up for sale while I was still living in it. For nearly 12 years, our home had been the center of my world. It wasn't a mansion or a luxury property. It was simply a warm, comfortable place filled with memories that couldn't be replaced. Every wall reminded me of a different chapter of our lives. I remembered painting the bedrooms together before moving in. I remembered planting flowers in the front yard during our first spring. I remembered celebrating birthdays, holidays, and quiet evenings on the back porch. To me, the house represented stability. No matter what happened outside those walls, I believed I always had a safe place waiting for me. Life had become predictable, and I wasn't complaining. I worked remotely as a graphic designer, which meant I spent most of my days at home. My husband often traveled for business, or at least that was what I believed. His schedule had become busier over the last year, but I assumed his company was simply expanding. At first, I didn't question anything. People change, jobs become stressful, responsibilities grow heavier. Marriage isn't always exciting, and I accepted that. I never expected every day to feel like a romantic movie. I thought real love looked quieter than that. Still, small things slowly started to feel different. He became protective of his phone. He stayed awake much later than usual. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and notice that his side of the bed was empty. When I found him downstairs, he was usually staring at his laptop. Whenever I asked what he was working on, I always received the same simple explanation. I never pushed for more details because I trusted him. That trust would eventually become my biggest weakness. One Tuesday morning, everything began to change. I had just finished making coffee when I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Two people stood outside looking directly at my house. One of them carried a professional camera while the other held a clipboard. At first, I assumed they were working on another property nearby, but after several minutes, I realized they weren't paying attention to any other house. They were photographing mine. They walked slowly around the front yard, taking pictures from different angles. They even leaned toward the fence as if trying to capture every detail possible. I felt strange. I stepped closer to the window, expecting them to notice me and explain why they were there. Instead, they simply got back into their vehicle and drove away. The entire situation lasted less than 15 minutes. I tried to convince myself it wasn't important. Maybe the city was updating property records. Maybe someone had accidentally entered the wrong address. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation. By lunchtime, I had almost forgotten about it. 2 days later, another unfamiliar car stopped outside. This time, a middle-aged couple slowly walked around the neighborhood. They looked at my house for several minutes before pointing toward the backyard. One of them took several photos with a cell phone. Again, not the neighboring houses. Mine. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. I considered walking outside to ask what they were doing, but something stopped me. I couldn't explain why. Instead, I watched them leave just as quietly as they had arrived. That evening, I mentioned the strange visitors in passing while making dinner. My husband barely reacted. He simply suggested they were probably tourists who had gotten lost. The explanation sounded ridiculous. No tourist spends 15 minutes photographing an ordinary suburban home. For the first time in years, I noticed how quickly he wanted to end the conversation. It wasn't anger. It wasn't concern. It was avoidance. The following week, the same thing happened again. Different people, different vehicle, same behavior. At that point, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Curiosity slowly became anxiety. I searched neighborhood forums, wondering if anyone else had noticed unusual visitors. Nothing. I checked local community pages for news about property inspections. Nothing. Everything seemed completely normal, except my life. One afternoon, I decided to work from the local coffee shop instead of staying home. As I walked back toward my car, I happened to pass a real estate office. Large property listings filled the front window. Normally, I wouldn't have paid attention. Instead, something made me stop. I wasn't looking for anything specific. My eyes simply wandered from one listing to another. Then I saw it, for less than a second. A familiar front porch, white shutters, blue flower pots, a maple tree standing beside the driveway. My heart skipped a beat. It looked exactly like my house. I immediately stepped closer to the glass, but before I could read the information, an employee removed the display and carried it inside. I stood frozen on the sidewalk. My mind immediately searched for logical explanations. Maybe another house looked similar. Thousands of homes shared the same design. Maybe I was imagining things. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just seen my own home advertised for sale. I drove home faster than I should have. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, I stared at every detail. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Nothing seemed different. Nothing suggested that my life was about to fall apart. That evening I opened my laptop. Without really knowing why, I typed my address into several real estate websites. The first search returned nothing. The second returned nothing. I almost laughed at myself for becoming paranoid. Then I opened another website. The page loaded slowly. One listing appeared. The photograph looked painfully familiar. I felt every drop of blood leave my face. It wasn't a similar house. It wasn't another neighborhood. It wasn't even an old picture. It was my home. Every room had been professionally photographed. The kitchen, the living room, our bedroom, even my home office. Some of those photographs had clearly been taken while I was away. Others could only have been taken while I was sleeping upstairs. I stared at the screen in complete disbelief. The listing described the property in perfect detail, the square footage, the recent renovations, the backyard, the neighborhood. Everything was accurate. At the bottom of the page, one sentence changed my life forever. Private showings available by appointment. I wasn't just living in my house anymore. Someone was actively trying to sell it, and I had absolutely no idea how that was even possible. I kept staring at the listing long after the words stopped making sense. I refreshed the page over and over, hoping it would disappear as if it had been some kind of mistake. It never did. Every photograph was real. Every description was accurate. Someone had spent time preparing my home to be sold, and somehow I had never noticed. I wanted to believe that there had been a misunderstanding. Maybe someone had copied the wrong address. Maybe the listing belonged to another property. But deep inside, I already knew the truth. This wasn't an accident. Someone had planned this carefully. I clicked through every photo one by one. The first few were taken from outside. Then came the kitchen, the dining room, and the living room. Everything looked cleaner than usual, almost staged. Decorative pillows had been moved. Fresh flowers sat on the dining table. I hadn't bought those flowers. Then I noticed something even stranger. One of the photographs showed my office. The chair was pulled away from the desk, and my laptop was missing. I remembered exactly when that must have happened. A few weeks earlier, I had spent the entire afternoon visiting my mother while my husband claimed he was working from home. That meant he had invited a photographer into the house without telling me. I felt sick. The realization wasn't just painful. It was humiliating. Someone had walked through every room where I laughed, cried, worked, and slept, while I had no idea they were even there. I closed the website and immediately searched public property records. The ownership information hadn't changed. Both my husband's name and mine were still listed. That confused me. How could anyone sell the house without my signature? For the first time since finding the listing, I felt a small sense of relief. Maybe this couldn't actually happen. Maybe there was still time to stop whatever was going on. But another question quickly replaced that hope. If the sale couldn't happen legally without me, why had my husband gone this far? The next morning, I pretended everything was normal. I made breakfast. I answered work emails. I smiled when my husband left for work. The moment his car disappeared around the corner, I began searching the house. I hated myself for doing it. I had always believed that respecting someone's privacy was part of a healthy marriage. But healthy marriages weren't built on secrets like this. I started with his home office. Most of the drawers contained ordinary paperwork, tax documents, instruction manuals, office supplies, nothing unusual. Then I opened the bottom filing cabinet. Inside sat several folders neatly arranged by year. One folder had no label. My hands shook as I opened it. The first page was a property valuation report. The second contained repair estimates. The third was a professional inspection report completed less than 2 months earlier. My breathing became shallow. No one schedules inspections for a house they aren't planning to sell. I continued turning pages. There were emails printed on expensive paper. Most of them were conversations with a real estate agent. I recognized the company logo from the office I had passed earlier that week. The messages discussed photography, marketing strategies, and possible listing prices. One sentence made my stomach drop. The owner would like to complete the transaction before the end of summer. The owner, singular, not owners.as if I didn't exist. I searched the folder again. Near the back, I found a calendar. Several dates had been circled in red. One of them was only 6 days away. Next to it, someone had written 2 simple words, private showing. Suddenly everything made sense. The strangers outside my house hadn't been random visitors. They had been potential buyers. I leaned back in the chair, trying to process what I had discovered. The obvious question still remained unanswered. Why? We weren't struggling financially. Our mortgage was almost paid off. Neither of us had mentioned moving. Nothing explained why he would secretly sell the only home we owned together. Unless there was something much bigger that I still didn't know. I decided to search his desk one last time. Hidden beneath several notebooks, I found a second phone. It wasn't old.it, wasn't broken.it, was fully charged. My heart pounded as I picked it up. The screen lit immediately. There was no password. For several seconds I simply stared at it. Part of me wanted to put it back exactly where I had found it. Another part knew that if I walked away now, I might never learn the truth. I opened the messages. The first few conversations were about the house. Then I saw a contact saved only with the letter L. Hundreds of messages. I opened the newest one. Within seconds, my entire world shifted. The conversation wasn't about business.it, wasn't about real estate.it, was personal, very personal. The messages made it painfully clear that my husband had been living another life for a long time. He wasn't simply planning to move. He was planning a completely different future. There were discussions about vacations, apartments, furniture, restaurants they wanted to visit together, even holidays they planned to celebrate. As I continued reading, one detail stood out above everything else. They spoke as though I had already disappeared. Not once did either of them wonder how I would feel. Not once did they mention telling me the truth. Instead, they discussed timing. The house had to be sold first. Only then could they start over somewhere else. I felt strangely calm. The tears never came. The anger hadn't arrived yet. There was only silence. The kind of silence that follows the complete destruction of everything you believed. I set the phone back exactly where I had found it. Then I noticed a folded envelope tucked underneath the drawer liner. It hadn't been visible before. I carefully pulled it out. Inside was a copy of a bank statement. The account number was unfamiliar. The balance was nearly $400,000. I stared at the number for several long seconds. We didn't have that kind of money. Not even close. Where had it come from? Then I looked at the account holder's name. Only my husband's name appeared. No joint ownership. No mention of me. My mind raced through every possibility. Hidden investments, inheritance, business profits. None of it added up. And then I saw the recent transactions, large cash deposits, large withdrawals, transfers to people whose names I didn't recognize. It looked nothing like ordinary family finances. I carefully photographed every page with my phone before putting everything back exactly as I had found it. By the time my husband returned home that evening, the house looked exactly the same. So did I smiled. I asked about his day. I listened as he casually described meetings that I no longer believed had ever happened. For the first time in 12 years, I looked at the man sitting across from me and realized I had absolutely no idea who he really was. That night, while he slept peacefully beside me, I made a decision. I would stop asking questions. Instead, I would quietly collect every piece of evidence before he realized I knew the truth, because something told me that selling our house was only the beginning. And whatever he was hiding behind that secret bank account was far more dangerous than an affair. The next morning, I woke up feeling like a completely different person. For nearly 12 years, I had been a wife who trusted without hesitation. Overnight, I had become someone who questioned every memory, every explanation, and every promise. Oddly enough, that change made me calmer. I stopped looking for excuses. I stopped hoping there was some misunderstanding waiting to be discovered. Instead, I focused on facts. Every document I had photographed was backed up in multiple places. I even sent copies to an email account my husband didn't know existed. If anything happened to my phone or laptop, the evidence would still be safe. Over the next several days, I paid close attention to everything. My husband continued behaving as though nothing had changed. He left early. He returned late. Sometimes he claimed he had business dinners. Other evenings he insisted he needed to meet with clients. I no longer believed a single word. The date marked private showing was approaching, and I knew I couldn't wait much longer. Rather than confronting him, I decided to visit the real estate office whose logo I had seen on the paperwork. I walked in, pretending to be a curious homeowner looking for information about the local market. The receptionist welcomed me warmly. As I looked around the office, I spotted a brochure featuring the same agent whose name appeared throughout the documents I had found. I asked a few harmless questions about selling homes in the neighborhood. Then I casually mentioned my address. The agent's expression changed. For only a fraction of a second. It was enough. She recognized the property immediately, trying to remain calm. I explained that I was one of the owners and wanted to discuss the listing. Confusion quickly spread across her face. She excused herself and disappeared into another office. Several minutes later, she returned, carrying a folder. The moment she looked at me again, I realized something had gone terribly wrong. According to the paperwork she had received, I had supposedly authorized the sale months earlier. My signature appeared on multiple documents. I stared at the pages in disbelief. The signature looked similar to mine, but it wasn't mine. Someone had forged it. The agent immediately understood why I looked so shocked. She apologized repeatedly and explained that everything had appeared legitimate. The identification copies matched. The signatures matched. Nothing had raised suspicion. I asked for copies of every document connected to the listing. She hesitated, only briefly before agreeing. As soon as I left the office, I drove directly to an attorney. For the next 2 hours, we reviewed every page together. The conclusion was immediate. The signatures were fraudulent. The sale could not legally proceed, and whoever had prepared those documents had committed a serious crime. My attorney advised me not to warn my husband. Instead, we contacted the appropriate authorities and prepared an emergency request to stop the transaction before ownership could be transferred. Everything happened much faster than I expected. The scheduled showing went ahead exactly as planned. Potential buyers arrived. The real estate agent arrived. My husband arrived. But before the meeting could continue, investigators entered the property. The sale was suspended immediately. Watching everything unfold from a distance was surreal. For weeks I had imagined confronting him myself. Instead, the evidence spoke louder than any emotional conversation ever could. The forged signatures, the hidden financial records, the secret communications, the false documents, everything was laid out piece by piece. As the investigation continued over the following months, an even bigger truth came to light. The hidden bank account wasn't simply where he had been saving money. It had been used to move funds through a series of private business deals that were never disclosed to me. Several financial transactions were found to be connected to fraudulent property investments involving other people as well. Our house wasn't the only property involved. It was simply the last one. The affair that had once seemed like the biggest betrayal quickly became almost insignificant. The lies had gone far beyond another relationship. He had been building an entirely separate life while using our marriage as a cover. Friends who had once admired our relationship admitted they had noticed changes, but never wanted to interfere. His coworkers revealed that many of the business trips had never existed. Even some family members confessed they had been told stories that made me appear controlling and uninterested in our marriage. Little by little, I understood how carefully he had managed every version of the truth, depending on who was listening. The legal process wasn't quick. It took nearly a year before everything was finally settled. The forged documents ensured the attempted sale was declared invalid. The house legally remained mine as much as it had always been. Eventually, as part of the final settlement, I became the sole owner. The day I received the official paperwork, I unlocked my front door and stood quietly in the hallway. Nothing around me had changed. The walls were the same. The windows overlooked the same street. The maple tree still moved gently whenever the wind picked up. Yet, everything felt different. This house no longer represented the life I thought I had. Instead, It represented the life I had managed to save. For months I considered selling it myself. Every room reminded me of painful memories, but as time passed, new memories slowly replaced the old ones. I repainted every room. I donated furniture we had chosen together. I redesigned the garden with flowers I had always wanted, but never planted, because he disliked them. The house gradually stopped feeling like our home. It became mine. People often ask what hurt the most. Most assume it was discovering another woman. Others think it was learning about the hidden money. Some believe it was the forged signatures. The truth is much simpler. The deepest wound came from realizing that someone I loved had quietly planned a future that didn't include me while smiling across the dinner table every evening. That realization changed the way I looked at trust forever. But it didn't destroy me. It forced me to become stronger than I ever imagined possible. Today, when I sit on my back porch with a cup of coffee, I sometimes think about the morning I first noticed strangers taking photographs of my house. Back then, I believed they were documenting the end of my life. I couldn't have been more wrong. Without realizing it, they had captured the beginning of a completely new chapter, one built on truth instead of illusion. One where I no longer ignored my instincts just to keep someone else comfortable. If there's one lesson I carried away from everything that happened, it's this: a home is never just the place where you live, it's the place where you feel safe enough to be yourself. The moment someone tries to take that away through lies, manipulation, or betrayal, they aren't stealing a building, they're trying to steal your peace. I almost let that happen. Almost. Instead, I walked through the hardest year of my life, protected what mattered most, and discovered something far more valuable than the house I fought to keep. I discovered that rebuilding your life is possible, even after the person you trusted most tries to tear it apart. And that was the only ending I truly needed.